Hey folks, welcome to the Triple T Thursday. For those just joining us, that's tools, tips, and talk, where we'll discuss info for the knife maker. In today's episode, I was going to do the Twist Damascus episode, but I just ran out of time. So instead, I'm going to answer some viewer questions, and we're going to set things up for our future patterns and talk about distortion on purpose and how to set that up for your patterns. So the first thing I want to talk about is just some clarification on the subtractive patterns and what that means. I had an interesting viewer question. Could you do this without actually removing material? Well, I think it may be possible. I actually don't think you're going to get what he's expecting. So I'm going to go into that because I just thought it was an interesting one. And then we're going to go into crushed W's, how to make crushed W's, because that is kind of one of the mother patterns you need to learn in order to get the future patterns correct. So let's go down to the table, talk about this viewer question, and then we'll get into crushed W's. Okay, let's talk about this viewer question. Before this, I'm assuming you've got some billet that's around 200 plus layers. This is just approximating that. So you'll start with something like this. This would be a cross section of the billet. And just as a reminder, a subtractive pattern means you're going to remove, okay, you can see I've cut this out of the billet. Okay, the layers stop here. When you press this, these layers will get moved up, okay, because obviously pressing from the bottom, this is going to push all of this material up until it's flat. These layers, these will just come up here, and that's what you see. If you were to press something into the billet, you're just pushing the layers down. If you were to repress it again, this will just get pushed up. There would probably be some distortion in the layers, but that just gives you kind of a funky random pattern. Okay. The premise of this viewer was, I'm going to press either side of the billet, then cut it in half, put some steel in the center as a san mai, and then press the whole thing, and he expected to get a ladder. My feeling is he will not. He will get some crazy random pattern, but nothing close to a ladder. Or you may get something close to a ladder, but then it's still considered a subtractive pattern. So let's go into this. So again, if you were to just press like this, even if it was opposing, you're really, the most of the distortion will be here. You may get some distortion on these layers here and these layers here, but not really. Because when you press like this, the steel will tend to get pushed out this way. You will get some compression here, but not a whole lot. So if you were to just cut this in half, it's the same as doing this. If you press it again, you're just going to push the layers up. You're not going to get a ladder. You're just going to get some distortion in a random pattern. Okay, so, well, what if we pushed these in even deeper? You may get something like this. So here you can see the distortion on the layers. I've made it go a little further. And again, this might, I approximated this on the computer, so these distortion lines may actually go a little deeper. The risk here, of course, is you got to be really precise when you cut this in the center so you don't hit these, because obviously that would be bad. So let's assume that you cut this perfectly and you got something like this. Okay, so you can see I cut the distortion, or I cut the layers here and cut them here. So you kind of cut the top off. Then if you were to take these and flip them, you would get, so I take the bottom and put on the top put it on the bottom, and put something in between, you would see I would get something like this. Essentially, I've cut the top off of this. You've removed the top off it. Okay, it moved down here. It's still a subtractive pattern. You've subtracted the top off of this and moved it here. Okay, so you didn't lose anything. You didn't have to grind anything away. It's still considered a subtractive pattern because you moved it from here, you took it off here. Same thing here. You took it off from this one. So now if you were to compress it, you may get a ladder. Again, that depends on where you cut this. If you cut this perfectly in the center and you got it through the layers here, again, which you can't see because you're cutting it this way, then you may get a ladder. This will produce kind of a ladder, but by the time you press it, all of this material is going to get pushed up here. So one of the issues with doing this is that your core is now going to get pushed up into here. So you're probably going to get this Damascus in the center. So when you were to make a knife out of it, your core steel will not be in the core. This will be in the core, in the very edge. So you're going to have the Damascus most likely on the edge here. Same with this. This is going to get pushed down so that this will be up here and this Damascus will be in the center. Again, you may get sort of a ladder here, but I think there's so much movement here. And because of where you need to cut it, which you can't see, I'm very skeptical. Odds are it's probably going to be this case. We'll see. Maybe he gets lucky. It is possible, but again, it's still considered a subtractive pattern. So I wanted to go over that for folks. So far, we've done ladder and raindrop, the subtractive patterns. Twist is the one we're going to cover next week. Those are the patterns where you're basically looking at this surface. Okay, again, this is a cross section, so you're always looking at this surface as what your pattern is. Okay, always looking at this because this is the ladder we're seeing. So those are the patterns which we consider the easiest ones because of this. Okay, you're just manipulating the pattern to see what you see on the surface. Now we're going to move into patterns where we're going to be looking at the end. Okay, this part. Okay, as if you were looking this way. So that's the very next thing we're going to start. And then we're also going to start varying the layers. Here we're only alternating the layers, strictly alternating layers. 1080, 15 and 20, 1080, 15 and 20, always alternating. And I mean, you can do ladder and raindrop with non-alternating patterns. You don't see it very often. Most people just alternate. Let's move on to crush W's and what we're going to do on the end of the billet. So now I've oriented my stack with some different pattern in it. It's not just alternating layers. I put a thick strip in the center, a strip here, and a strip here of 1084, okay, or darker steel, whatever you choose. And we're going to manipulate this. Okay, again, we're looking at the end. If it's a long billet, we're looking at that end. The first thing we're going to do is obviously just forge weld it together, okay, and then I've turned it 90 degrees in the press. Now we're going to do what's called C's. And C's means we're going to press in the corners, okay, all four of these corners to get something like this. Okay, you can see the layers are going to get distorted here and bend over. And you usually do this with squaring dies, and you'll see this in a future video. But this is a really, really core pattern. This is going to be what I call one of the mother patterns. A lot of patterns are going to be based on you being able to do C's like this. Okay. Obviously, if you don't get these perfectly aligned and you were to start with it like this, instead of having this straight, perfect C's, you can see these are like the C's, you're going to get a bit of an S. Okay. Because this thing will get pressed on an angle, and instead of this, it'll go whew, like this. But we want C's. That's the perfect outcome here. Sometimes you want the S. We'll talk about that later. Once you get these corners crushed in, then we're going to compress it this way. And then you really end up with C's. Okay, you can see how all of these at the ends all form C's. This, when you cut this and restack this billet, this is what you'll get when you hear a lot of people refer to as crushed W's, because here, this is a W, and this is a W. That's what people are talking about. They're restacking C's to get crushed W's. Okay, crushed W's is what you're going to use to make a lot of patterns. And here I'm going to go through an example of a very common pattern used for crushed W's. So you're obviously going to forge weld these 4 stacks together. Okay, then I'm just turning it 90 degrees and I'm going to re-square it. I'm going to knock in the corners. Okay, and I'm going to literally re-square it. Not just knock it in, but re-square the entire thing. And you can see it's got these little cool little mountains, and depending on how many layers you have, if you had 5, you'd get 1 peak that's right at the point here. Totally depends on what you do. And the strip here, it's in the center. If you offset it, it might be up here. So there's all kinds of different things you can do with the arrangement of the pattern. So here we've got this. If we want to go to a more complicated pattern, I've just rotated that 90 degrees. If we cut this in 4, you can see that 1, this is right here. Then we took it and rotated it, forge welded those together to get this kind of explosion or star pattern. Okay, then if you take this and cut that bar in 4 and do the same thing, you'll get this. You can see this is this thing. We just restack them 4-way together, and you get a little combo pattern in the corner here. So then you have this on the end of your billet. And then you'll see in a future episode how we tile this, and that's how we get into mosaics. But I wanted to show you guys the importance of the C's and the crushed W's, because this jagged movement is how you're going to get a lot of this kind of pattern of these, these little things, the little ripples here. It usually always comes from this kind of pattern. So I hope you guys got some interesting information out of today's video. I wanted to set this up so we know what we're talking about for future videos. And we can just refer to those mother patterns of C's and crushed W's, and how we're going to layer the Damascus differently for some patterns. So I also wanted to thank a subscriber, Bob Gore, sent me a package that had a bunch of cool stuff in it. I'll show you guys what was in it. So Bob sent me this package with a bunch of stuff, and it was all wrapped up. I've already unpacked it. But first off, espresso maple syrup. So this should be pretty interesting. If you're not aware, I'm Canadian, so I know all about maple syrup, but never with espresso in it. So we're going to give that a shot. And then I guess he found a bunch of this copper that he decided he would pick up for me. I think displaying some knives, especially the copper knives, against this will look really cool. So more of some display pieces and then a bunch of this loose copper down here. So thanks a lot, Bob. That's really thoughtful, and I'm sure I'll use these for some display pieces in the future. So thank you. Thanks again for joining me on this Triple T. As always, I want to thank our sponsor, Maritime Knife Supply. If you need anything knife related, go check them out. Link down in the description. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.